ba ito?
Iba na po ngayon, Lola. Masimple nang bumoto. Gaya nitong balota, shade lang ng buo ang oval na katapat ng kandidatong iboboto. Huwag kukulangin. Dapat buong buo. Pero mag-iingat din. Huwag mag-overvote. Isang oval lang ang shade sa mga posisyon na isang kandidato lang ang ihahalal para mabilang ang boto.
Ang simple.
Iba na ngayon.
That was a Comelec public service announcement aimed at showing just how easy it is to vote in the country's first ever automated polls. But tonight we'll explore some findings that show that the electorate hasn't quite learned this simple lesson. What this could mean for the election's outcome is what we'll discuss tonight. I'm Manolo Quezon, the explainer. Joining me is Pulse Asia's Chief Research Fellow, Professor Ana Marie Tabunda. Welcome back to the show. Well, in January, what you started to do, in contrast to the earlier polls, was you started simulating the actual voting process. In other words, your respondents had to actually fill out a ballot. Mm-hmm. And based on these things, some interesting findings emerged, which we'd like to discuss tonight. But perhaps you'd like to walk us through the process that was followed?
Yes. We gave each respondent a ballot, and all the interviewer said was, if elections of May 2010 were held today, okay, which of these names would you vote for as president, vice president, senators, and party list group? And then they were told, this is just a sample ballot. Please read the instructions carefully. Of course, this is in the vernacular. And so they were left to fill it up. But instead of asking them to put it in a box, we asked them to give it back to the interviewer. And then the interviewer would note if there were overvote, meaning if they voted 2 or more for president and 13 or more for senator. And once there's an indication of overvote, like this one in the vice presidential, the interviewer asked, you put here 2, who do you really want to vote for? And so we recorded the intention.
So in other words, there's no such thing as a spoiled ballot in contrast to the way it might be in a regular election. Because, for example, if this were done in the precinct, that vote for vice president would simply have not been counted.
Yes, in the machine. But there's still a spoiled ballot in the machine, in the sense that it will reject some ballots because of possibly wrong paper or too many ambiguous marks. Used to be if you somehow touch the barcode, but now they have deactivated that. So, but there's still a chance, because they say if the machine rejects your ballot, review it and then try again.
Well, in the case of of this, since you're not using the same paper and you're not actually using a machine, we have to restrict ourselves to the marks that the respondents made.
Yes.
Which, as a simulation, should give us a sort of an insight into how it might be on voting day.
Yes.
So you had some interesting findings, because, for example, the Comelec itself reminds us that you're supposed to avoid 2 things in particular. One is you're supposed to really fill in the bilog, the nahugis itlog.
Yeah.
You're supposed to fill it in properly. That's one. The second is vote for the right number of candidates and don't exceed it. So based just on those 2 questions to begin with, what have you found?
Well, we found that overvote is not as big a problem as improper or incorrect shading. So we found out that overvote affects around, I'll just round it, around 2% of votes for president, 1% of votes for vice president, but 3% of votes for senatorial, and 1% for party list.
Okay,
group.
so when you speak, for example, of, let's walk through this, 2% for the presidency, it means that 2% of the votes cast in your simulation had an overvoting.
Yes. Yes.
So if you were to extrapolate it into a real world scenario, this is Thousands, tens of thousands?
If we have 50 million voters and assuming a turnout rate of 80%, so 40 million, so 2% will be like 800,000.
That's quite a lot.
Yes.
Okay, and then for vice president?
1%,
1%,
so 400,000 more or less.
Now, for the highest percentage you had was for the senatorial.
Senatorial, yes, where even small differences in voter preference could mean being inside the magic circle or out.
What does this 3%, for example, extrapolate to in
1.2 M.
1.2 million votes
voters,
that
yes.
could be...
Well, if you overvote, the vote is not counted.
So
for
that's
that race.
that's actually a subtraction of potentially
Yes,
1.2
yes.
million. And let's walk our viewers through this. This is particularly crucial in the senatorial election because
Yeah.
the winning numbers are often very tight.
Yes.
Especially for the 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. And we're not even sure if, the guys who had been in the lead before, because, this who is number one matters to these candidates. We're not even sure we'll capture that if we have this problem of overvote.
What if you go through your most recent survey findings, for example, without naming names, what is the general sort of spread between the candidates fighting it out for the various slots?
Well, in the case of the first position, it's a statistical tie. But there's a big drop, let's say, between the 8th, 9th, and the 10th, 11th. And so, in the case of the 10th, 11th, 12th, it's a close fight. And they will really be affected by this problem of 3% of voters having overvoted.
So if someone wanted to just sort of explore how it could complicate matters, just do a -3 across the board and see.
And you'll see how it shuffles, yeah.
And so that could really upset a lot of candidates.
Yes.
And for party lists, your result was?
It's just about 1% overvote. You see, the reason it's more complicated for the senatorial, they can name as many as 12.
Mhm.
Whereas I suppose because the campaign for the other races emphasize only one name, fewer are thinking of more names than one. But in the case of the senatorial race, where they know they can vote as more than one,
the room for error
the
therefore
risk is
increases.
larger, yes. For overvote.
Okay, so that's just covering the question of voting for the right number of candidates.
Yes.
Now, if we shift over to the next issue, which is filling in the oval,
Yes.
what
Well,
happens?
we tagged 12.1% or 12.5%, even if you round it, let's say 12% of votes having improper shading. By this we mean we cannot exactly say that they filled in at least 50%.
The crucial threshold from the point of view of both the programming of the machines and the
We were
standards of
told.
the COMELEC is that you have to shade in at least 50% of the itlog for it to count.
That's what I saw in the COMELEC website the last time I looked.
Okay.
Yes.
Now there's a system for the machine to do this. You weren't using a machine.
No, we were using human appreciations. I'm thinking what happens at the random manual audit.
Can you show us an example of what these marks are like?
Okay, first I'll show you an example of an overvote.
Okay.
Okay, here we have the easiest to overvote is the senatorial, and this respondent shaded 19 candidates. And when the interviewer went back to her, okay, those with this is just to tell us this. After reviewing, she said, no, these are my 12.
Okay.
That's an example of an overvote. The example of an incorrect shading is this one, where you can see almost just dots.
And yet, above it, for the president and vice president, they're better filled out.
They're better